Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our conversation to Iliad, book 18. The shield of Achilles is how Fagles decides to translate the title or provide the title for this book. This is a real, I realize, hey, guys, I get it. Every time we talk about a book from the Iliad, I always seem to want to say this is the, but really, this is an amazing book for us. We have here the great book of art, the Iliad, describing art, Achilles' shield that Hephaestus makes for him. Now, if you haven't been with me, you want to hit learnstrong.net, hit that AP folder, and watch the prior lectures. Let's just do a real quick summary of where we've been. In book 1 of Iliad, we of course have the invocation of the Muse, that famous invocation of the Muse, and of course Achilles falling out with Agamemnon. That is of course critical for everything that happens in the Iliad, especially of course the book 18 and then 19 to follow. In book 2, we've got Agamemnon's bad dream that Zeus sends to him to tells him that, hey, you guys are going to win this thing. We got the catalog of the ships and the chariots, and of course it isn't going to work out the way Agamemnon thinks at all. In book 3, we think we've probably ended the war because Paris and Menelaus fight, and Menelaus looks like he's destroyed Paris. In book 4, Zeus and Hera have their little conversation back and forth. We're going to have one of those again in this book. And Hera will convince Zeus, we got to have Troy fall. So Pandarus the Trojan will shoot at Menelaus an arrow, and now we're back on with the war. In book 5, we've got Diomedes, Aristeia. Aristeia, of course, that type scene of the battle scene, which is so important throughout our reading, studying of the Iliad. Obviously, we're about to hit Achilles' Aristeia here in a bit, right? And Diomedes in book 5 will actually wound Aphrodite and Ares. In book 6, pivotal book for us, Hector back in the walls of Troy, last time with his wife Andromache and of course his young son Astyanax. In book 7, we then will have Ajax versus Hector, and we see this kind of repeated over and over again, the standoff of all standoffs, right? Ultimately, a truce is decided between the two of them. In book 8, we've got Zeus's scales, the famous scales, and Zeus decides that the Trojans and Hector will ascend and the Greeks are going to get jacked for at least a while. Book 9, Agamemnon realizes through the help of Nestor, Agamemnon realizes he has issues. He will send the embassy of Odysseus, Phrynox, and Ajax, and of course Achilles will say, yeah, not interested. I paused and gave a review of books 1 through 9. I called it Achilles' Crisis of Faith. There I talk about the significance of the fact that Achilles will reject the warrior code. Time, that idea of honor and Scooby snacks, and glory, kleos, the idea that you'll be remembered after you die. Achilles, he's not sure he believes in any of it anymore. That may account for why he's so beside himself with grief the minute he finds out in book 18 that Patroclus is dead. In book 10, of course, Diomedes and Odysseus have that famous night raid where they jack Dolan, steal some ponies along with it. In book 11, Agamemnon's Aristeia, which will lead ultimately to Achilles kind of looking out onto the troops, sending Patroclus to Nestor, and of course all of the events that will then take place after the longest day that begins in book 11 will start in fact at that moment when Patroclus will have his conversation with Nestor. In book 12, we've got the Trojans at the trench, the ramparts, the wall, Hector and his huge boulder, and it's starting to look very, very bad for the Greeks, which in book 13 will lead Poseidon as Calchas to encourage the Greeks. Ultimately, we'll have Hector taunting Paris. We're going to begin to ask, where is Paris at the end of the Iliad, and why isn't he more mentioned? Because he stands there looming the whole time, because we know that Achilles is going to die, and we know that Achilles is going to die because Patroclus is going to shoot him in the foot, right? Ultimately, at the end of book 13, we have Hector's famous scream. We're going to have another scream here. The Iliad, I once had a student who said, the Iliad is basically a whole bunch of screaming, and on one count, it's kind of true. Book 14, however, you've got, of course, when sex meets violence with Hera seducing Zeus, which allows for Ajax to then ultimately jack Hector with a big boulder. He wakes up, Zeus wakes up in book 15, very upset, tells Poseidon to knock it off, sends Apollo to heal Hector, and now the Trojans really do begin their ascension, right? In book 16, the famous death of Sarpedon, which is, of course, Zeus' son, which in many ways prefigures what's coming. Patroclus himself will have his Aristeia, and then by the end of book 16, Hector has killed Patroclus. In book 17, we have the famous fight over Patroclus' body, and Hector does the unthinkable. He takes Achilles' armor off of Patroclus and puts it on himself, and Antilochus is sent to go back to tell Achilles, we got problems because your pal is dead. Which brings us now to the opening lines of Book 18, and we'll be there in a second. Let's just do a real quick summary now of Book 18. First, we'll have the soliloquy of Achilles, where he somehow knows this ain't going good. Antilochus tells Achilles, Patroclus is dead, and immediately Achilles is just devastated, right? Well, of course, we're going to ask, is the reason because he has a loss of a friend, a pal, or a lover even, or he has terrific guilt, or this crisis of faith that I was talking about earlier, or obviously all of them together. Achilles' mom comes, Thetis comes, she holds her son's head, cradles her son's head in an image that, and many scholars have pointed out, is the image of death. In other words, when Achilles hits the ground after he hears that Patroclus is dead, the word that actually gets used in the Greek is the word for death, laying out as a corpse. And it's the only time in the Iliad that it's used of a living person. It's always used of the dead bodies in the Iliad, right? And he will say it, I have no will to live. Achilles then is done. And he buries the hatchet, if you will, with Agamemnon, and he says, I'm going to get to my revenge, and that's it, right? He says, I'm ready to bury it. Thetis will tell Achilles, I'm going to go to Hephaestus. I'm going to get some armor for you. Okay. We then will have the fight, which continues for Patroclus' body. Iris is going to go to Achilles and say, we need you to stand at the trench, head like on fire with the sun going down. Remember, this is the end of the longest day. And then there's the famous 3 screams of Achilles, along with Athena, freaks the Trojans out. In fact, 12 of them die in a panic, just falling on their own spears and that kind of thing. Achilles then will see Patroclus' body, because the Greeks will recover it, at line 270. And it's really from that moment on that Achilles' life is ended. At line 280, the end of the longest day, that started, of course, in Book 11 with the wounding of Agamemnon and that signal that was given to Hector. Once Agamemnon's wounded, you're ready to go. Okay. Next, we have the Trojans. Speaking of the Trojans, and the argument that breaks out, kind of like an argument between Agamemnon and Achilles at the beginning of Book 1. Polydamas will say, in fact, let's return to Troy. We're too far away, and we are exposed. Let's get back, and then tomorrow we can begin the process of fighting again. Hector will have none of it. Hector feels like he is right there. The next morning, he doesn't care if it's going to be Achilles. He's ready to go and fight. Of course, the poet will tell us he's lost in folly, and that Hector's ruinous tactics are going to lead to his death. Achilles, in the meantime, will lead the mourning over Patroclus. He says several important things. He says, I'm not going to bury you until Hector is dead. He says, I'm going to sacrifice 12 sons of Troy to you. Greeks don't really approve of human sacrifice, and yet here it is. We're going to have it in this poem, right? They wash Patroclus' body. They mourn all night. This will remind us, by the way, of St. Augustine's classic Book 4 of Confessions, where he talks about the death of his close friend and the grieving that he goes through there. Certainly, of course, St. Augustine knew very much about this scene. You can go and find those lectures, of course, in the Harvard Classics on St. Augustine, right? On Mount Olympus, Zeus will say to Hera, well, okay, you got what you wanted here, right? And Hera will pretend like she doesn't know what he's talking about. And then finally, the book will end with Thetis, with Hephaestus. She will beg him to make a suit of armor. Hephaestus will make the most amazing shield in the history of all shields, beginning at line 558 and finishing at line 710. The book will end then with the armor that has been constructed for Achilles being delivered to him. Now, I say this every time we play this game, but dude, I'm serious. I wish I could read all of this word for word for you. I just don't have the time. This really is one of the most amazing books for me in the Iliad, because of its description of grief, the loss of a pal. And how do you describe that? We're going to see it here. And because of its description of art, Keats loved this book, and in fact, several times you can see in his poems referenced back to this, okay? And we'll have more to say about that at 3a here in a bit, okay? The description of the shield is just remarkable. Now, just to remind, I'm challenging you to read on your own and use me as help, reminding you that our learning theory is always trying to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do that in our annotative process by answering at level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? To a message is to be rhetoric. Here, of course, for us with rhetoric, we're studying primarily symbolism of this text and, of course, irony of this text. We're going to see a whole lot of both. And then finally at level 3, how can I relate to this? First of all, 3a, other texts. And then finally 3b, how can I relate this to myself personally? The opening lines of Book 18 are worthy of our time. Let's take a look at them. So the men fought on like a massive whirling fire. Put it in your notes. Fire is going to become the motif of all motifs here now as we move into the final books of the Iliad, especially because of the wrath of Achilles that was mentioned in the opening lines. As swift Antilochus rushed the message towards Achilles. How would you like to be this guy's, have this guy's job, right? Antilochus' job. Sheltered under his curving beaked ships, he found him, Achilles, foreboding, deep down, all that had come to pass, agonizing. Now, he probed his own great heart, and we have a Shakespearean-like soliloquy at play. Why? Our long-haired Achaeans routed again, driven in terror off the plain to crowd the ships. But why? Dear gods, don't bring to pass the grief that haunts my heart, the prophecy that Mother revealed to me one time. She said, the best of the Myrmidons, while I lived, would fall at Trojan hands and leave the light of day. And now, he's dead, I know it. Menicius' gallant son. He made a promise, of course, to Menicius, to the father of Paris, that he'd bring him back. The father of Patroclus said he'd bring him back. My headstrong friend is what he'll call him. And I told Patroclus clearly, once you've beaten off the lethal fire, quick, come back to the ships. You must not battle Hector. As such fears went churning through his mind, the warlord Nestor's son, Antilochus obviously, drew near him now, streaming warm tears to give the dreaded message. Oh, son of royal Peleus, what you must hear from me, what painful news. Would to God it had never happened. Patroclus has fallen. They're fighting over his corpse. He's stripped naked. Hector with that flashing helmet. Hector has his arms. Has your arms, right? So the captain reported a black cloud of grief came shrouding over Achilles, both hands clawing the ground for soot and filth, pouring it on top of himself. He poured it over his head, fouled his handsome face and black ashes settled onto his fresh, clean washer. It's literally as if, right, he's dying, overpowered in all his power, sprawled in the dust. Achilles lay there, fallen, as if dead, right? The language is actually like dead. Tearing his hair, defiling it with his own hands, right? Well, we're told that a few lines later, at line 35 or so, Antilochus, kneeling near, weeping uncontrollably, clutched Achilles' hands as he wept his proud heart out, for fear he would slash his throat with an iron blade. Achilles suddenly loosed a terrible, wrenching cry. You could think of this as scream, obviously, right? I always think of that final scene, for those of you who are Godfather fans, that final scene in Godfather 3, when Al Pacino is showing maybe some of his finest acting, right, as Michael Corleone, when he realizes that his daughter has been killed because of him. And that scream that's audible but not audible, to begin with, that powerful, wrenching cry. And his noble mother, that has heard Achilles, seated near her father. And then we're told that all of the naiads will come and gather around. And you've got all kinds of them at lines 45 and following. Glitter, blossoming spray, cavern, mist and spindrift, hope, safe haven, glimmer of honey, suave and soothing. It's brilliant the way that Fagels will translate all of these different kinds of deities. Welcome home, bather of meadows, master's lovely consort, gift of sea, eyes of the world. All of these are going to gather around Thetis. And Thetis then will speak her words, right? She says it at line 60. I am agony, mother of grief and greatness. Oh, my child, yes, I gave birth to a flawless, mighty son, the splendor of heroes. And then she goes into the into the history of it. Now she's racked. She says about him, racked with anguish, and nothing I can help him, right? Nothing I do can help him. Of course, the irony of that will be that ultimately she will help him the only way she can, by going and getting Hephaestus to make some armor and that kind of thing. At line 80, we're told, as he groaned from the depths, his mother rose before him, and sobbing a sharp cry, cradled her son's head in her hands. Scholars have pointed out that this is actually an image for the Greeks of death, when the woman will stand behind or hold the son's or the man's head in her lap. In other words, it's as if somehow it's not Patroclus that we're grieving over here as Thetis, but rather her own son. Mother knows that it's over. And she says it. Irony on top of irony. My child, why in tears? Line 87. What sorrow has touched your heart? Tell me, please, don't harbor it deep inside you. Zeus has accomplished everything you wanted, just as you raised your hands and prayed that day. All the sons of Achaia are pinned against the ships, and all for want of you. They suffer shattering losses. The dark irony is that Mama reminds Achilles the whole reason why you were not there and Patroclus was fighting in your armor is because you made a request, a prayer to Zeus that I took to him. Thetis will remind him. It's like sticking the knife in and turning it without even realizing it and groaning deeply. The matchless runner Achilles answered, "Oh, dear mother, true. All those burning desires Olympian Zeus has brought to pass for me. But what joy to me now." In other words, okay, I got what I wanted, but I lost what I had. My dear comrades, dead. Patroclus, the man I love beyond all other comrades, loved as my own life, I've lost him. Hector's killed him. Stripped the gigantic armor off his back, a marvel to behold. My burnished gear, radiant gifts. Last word of this book, by the way, gift. The gods presented Peleus the day they drove you into a mortal marriage bed. I wish you'd lingered deep with the deathless sea nymphs, lived at ease, and Peleus carried home a mortal bride. I wish I'd never been born. And now, by the way, this gets said a number of times. Helen, of course, said it earlier. Now is it sorrows, as it is, sorrows, unending sorrows must surge within my heart as well for my son's death. Never again, for your son's death, never again will you embrace him, meaning me. Notice he's speaking in the third person as if he's dead already. Striding home, my spirit repels. And then he says it at line 105. I've lost the will to live, to take my stand in the world of men, unless, before all else, Hector's battered down by my spear and gasp away his life, the blood price for Patroclus, Menicius' gallant son, he's killed and stripped. And it's at this point that for the rest of the several books now, and much of the rest of the Iliad, this is all about now revenge for Achilles. But Thetis answered, warning through her tears. Line 110. You're doomed to a short life, my son, from all you say. For hard on the heels of Hector's death, your death must come at once. Then let me die at once, Achilles burst out, despairing, since it was not my fate to save my dearest comrade from his death. Look, a world away from his fatherland he's perished, lacking me, my fighting strength, to defend him. But now, since I shall not return to my fatherland, nor did I bring one ray of hope to my Patroclus, nor to the rest of all my steadfast comrades, countless ranks struck down by mighty Hector. In other words, it's weighing on him. He realizes, all these guys died because of me. No, here I sit by the ships, a useless dead weight on the good green earth. I, no man my equal among the bronze-armed Achaeans, not in battle, only in war of words that others win. He says, the only thing I've done is fight with words, and I'm not any good at that. Other people win. If only strife could die from the lives of gods and men. Of course, the wish of all of us is as we live. I wish there didn't have to be so much pain and suffering in the world. And anger that drives the sanest man to flare, and outrage. We're back to the opening lines of the Iliad, right? Bitter gall, sweeter than dripping streams of honey, that swarms in men's chests and blinds like smoke, just like the anger Agamemnon, king of men, is roused within me now. And then he says it at line 132. Enough. Let bygones be bygones. Done is done. Despite my anguish, I'll beat it down, the fury mounting inside me, down by force. And now I'll go and meet that murderer, Hector, head on. That Hector who destroyed the dearest life I know. Thetis will respond. She says, okay, you're right, you got it. Because Achilles will finish at line 148. Don't try to hold me back from the fighting, mother. Love me as you do. You can't persuade me now. And Mama says, you're right, my son. No coward's work to save your exhausted friends from headlong death. But your own handsome war gear lies in Trojan's hands, bronze and burnished. Hector in that flashing helmet. Hector glories in your armor, strapped across his back. Not that he will glory in it long, I tell you. His own destruction hovers near him now. we're back to that thing of Hector, right? When he put on the armor, Zeus said it, death is standing beside you. Wait, Mama says, don't fling yourself in the grind of battle yet, not till you see me coming back with your own eyes. Tomorrow, I will return to you with the rising sun. We are at the end of the longest day, bearing splendid arms from Hephaestus, god of fire. And again, this notion of the fire as being the primary motif now for several books. We'll see this, right? So in other words, she says it. Don't worry. She says, I'm coming back. Right? I'll get armor. We next have the movement where we realize they're still fighting over Patroclus' body. And without some help, we're going to have problems. Iris is sent from Olympus. She comes to Achilles at line 200 or so. To arms, son of Peleus, most terrifying man alive. Defend Patroclus. In other words, you got to help out. It's all for him, this merciless battle pitched before the ships. They're mauling each other now. Achaeans struggling to save the corpse from harm. Trojans charging to haul it back to windy Troy. Flashing Hectors far in the lead. Wild to drag it off. Furious to lop the head from its soft, tender neck and stake it high on the city's walls. Up with you. No more lying low. This sounds very much, of course, like the Dante lines we'll come to when Virgil will say to him, up on your feet, this is no time to tire, right? Of course, Dante knew these lines well, right? Writhe with shame at the thought Patroclus may be sport for the dogs of Troy. Of course, dogs will be turned loose on Hector's body. Yours, the shame will be yours if your comrade's corpse goes down to the dead defiled. And of course, Achilles then will decide, right? And he will then stand up and he will get ready to go. But here's what Iris says at line 230 or so. Quick as the wind, the goddess had a plan. We know, she says, we too, they hold your famous armor. It's because he has said, I can't go out there. She says, go out in front. But he says, I can't. I don't have any armor. Still, just as you are, go out to the broad trench and show yourself to the Trojans, struck with fear at the sight of you. They might hold off from attack, and Achaea's fighting sons get second wind, exhausted as they are. Breathing room in war is all too brief. We get this line, breathing room in war is all too brief, over and over again. So we're told that Achilles